question, and it's an increasingly worrisome problem for me personally, and for reporters that do the kind of work that you do. In this instance, there were quite a few people who had these records. I shouldn't say that. There weren't a lot of people that had the audio recording, and there weren't a lot of people that had their arm around all of these FBI statements, interview records. But there were enough people that could have given me their statements to muddy the waters, per your point. This has been a huge problem for me on this story writ large, however, not the 2011 shooting, but in covering the Secret Service, because it is a fireable offense to talk to a reporter without permission. It's a very unusual situation. This agency can argue that you've endangered national security or shown a lack of care by talking to a reporter. So one of my sources was fired, had found out and fired, because it was viewed that they were the only person who was likely able to tell me this piece of information. I feel strongly, it is a long-winded way to say, I feel strongly that as best you can do it, convince your sources, enlist them in the painstaking work of going through who else could have this, who else could you share it with, who else have you talked about it with, so that those are a larger and larger circle of people who might have provided it to me and therefore given you cover. Sure. So I hate to say it this bluntly, but I do believe that all whistleblower sources, they have an edge, they have an axe, they have a concern, and sometimes it's, in your view, very noble, and then sometimes in your view it's quite nefarious. I've had some people with incredibly ignoble motives who were fantastic sources, right on the money, great information, and they were trying to hurt somebody. Let's just please go right to 1970s. What do you think Mark Felt, Deep Throat, wanted when he went to Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein? Bob Woodward initially. Mark Felt was the deputy director of the FBI. He was angry that Nixon's administration had not promoted him and made him the FBI director. Did Deep Throat have bad information about the dirty tricks of Nixon and his plumbers? No. He had razor sharp, great information, and he had a motivation that was very personal. I think we need to know as much as we possibly can about our sources. Their motives, their goals are good to know, but you cannot reject a source because of some moral high ground, and you just have to be really savvy and careful that you know, as Tom is alluding to in his question, that they're not fabricating anything or leaving anything out. And that is just a meticulous, painstaking work that you have to do with them. And if they get hinky about answering your questions, then you know that something's up. I'll give you an example that always troubles me from our American, one of the most dark moments in American journalism was the argument for going to a war in Iraq. President Bush wasn't involved in this, but Vice President Cheney declassified a portion of a very, very, very tightly held classified document called the National Intelligence Estimate. He declassified about 2 paragraphs of it, and basically on his whim, he went declassified. Handed it to his deputy, Scooter Libby, who handed it to Judy Miller of the New York Times, quite a rock star at the New York Times at the time. And she published a series of stories arguing that there was evidence of yellow cake and uranium and tubes that were going to be used for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. This was the argument for going to war. She wrote, I think, 32 stories on that point. What Cheney never handed to Scooter Libby, and I don't know if he knew it, I don't know if Scooter Libby, I know Scooter Libby did not handle this to Judy Miller, was the 57 paragraphs that followed, which said the preceding paragraph was baloney and untrustworthy and had been rejected resoundingly. So Tom's question is so important. You have to know your sources, you have to press them and stress test them, and you have to always be looking around the corner. Are they leaving something out? And the answer is usually yes. But is it critical to your understanding? Is it fabricating what you think you know? Is it changing the nature? And in the case of Judy Miller, it was totally a fabrication. All the time. All the time. I mean, it's incredibly painful when you have a source who came to you trusting that they would be protected and they lose their job. And there have been several stories I just take a pass on until I can have enough. The protection is as solid as it can be. I thought it was for this person, and it was not, because of a surveillance that was going on I wasn't aware of. It's definitely at the top of my brain now.
And would you ever sit on a story, Carol, for say 6 months, or advise the source, maybe you need to make a few soundings internally and spread this thing out a little bit, and we'll return to it in
You gave
6
me
months
that idea. I think, Tom, that's brilliant. That's a great way to do it. I haven't suggested it exactly that way. I've asked people who else have you shared it with, but I think suggesting.
So you never advise them to share with lots of people?
No, I haven't. I'm going to think about that now. Personally, remember that I got hooked into this Secret Service story because so many agents were saying to me, we are not doing a good job. We are worried about him being killed on our watch. That is a version of what all of them said to me. I can't imagine what that would be like, having interviewed the agents who were on duty when Kennedy was killed. I have done that, and it's been fascinating, and they still break down in tears, grown 70, 80-year-old men describing that day. It's so damaging for them, and imagine what it is for democracy. I worry that Kennedy was absolutely right when he said that there is no protection from assassination if a person is determined enough and is willing to lose their own life. He said that over and over again, and I do think that it is sadly true. If someone's determined enough and willing to lose everything, it's possible. So I come to you today a little bit embarrassed because I'm in absolute catbird seat. I work for a fantastic editor, and we're owned by a billionaire who has said, I want you, Washington Post, to remain a critical institution, and I will spend as much money as reasonably possible in the next 5 to 10 years figuring out how you can become profitable. Who else has that? So it's really ridiculous for me to be able to relate to places, except for this experience. 5 years ago, I thought about leaving journalism because, people next to me were getting sacked, if that's your word, right? And they were getting fired. They were getting bought out, which is our polite term for saying we're going to give you a little bit of money to go. And our ambitions were reduced in a marked way. We were not doing investigative work that I thought should be championed. Those were dark times, and I stuck with it, and I kept being able to publish some work, almost by hook and by crook, and it was enough to keep going through that rough cycle. I also think, one thing that they said at the Washington Post when I arrived was, if you don't like your editor, if you don't feel supported by your editor, look for another person to be your unofficial editor. And I did do that quite a bit, and I found a lot of succor in that experience because people would tell me their ideas, how they would restructure the story, how they'd make it tougher. They'd give me their time, and so I strongly advise you to do that too if you feel that you're not getting the support you need.